So I am a native of Buffalo. I born in Buffalo, SUNY graduate. Shout out to SUNY Brockport as well, which I'm getting an alumni award in a couple weeks. But I was on the city council for uh, 5 years, in the state senate for 4 years, and I've been involved with clean energy, diversity, equity, and justice initiatives on and off throughout my adult life. And I currently serve as the executive director of the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities, which is one of the 80 coalitions around the country promoting clean energy, transportation, and environmental justice and equity. And so we're really excited about the partnership that we have with the Clean Fuels Alliance of America and the Renewable Energy Group and some of the other folks that are promoting alternative fuels. We are fuel neutral. Our biggest thing is reducing America's dependence on foreign oil and promoting climate solutions that make sense in not only in transportation, but also in buildings, and make sure we have a green workforce that uses cleaner products and that utilizes cleaner energy.
So again, thank you. It was a pleasure having you join us at the Pathways to a Cleaner Future conference. And the whole theme of it, environmental equity with of your panel, environmental equity with liquid transportation and heating fuels. I'd like to start with asking you to just talk about how the use of biomass diesel is contributing to the health and wellness of people in the United States, and if we could bring it home here to New York as well.
Yeah, well, first let me say thank you for having me on your program. I want to thank the organizers of the conference, especially all the folks at Clean Fuels, for having me there. I currently run the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition. We have a great partnership that focuses a lot around using biodiesel for vehicles, and with the DC Department of Public Works and the DC Water. And we have worked together to really retrofit a number of the diesel powered vehicles in the District of Columbia, Washington, DC, to make those vehicles more environmentally friendly. As you know, your listeners know, diesel fuels have a very negative impact on the environment, and has a very negative impact in underserved areas in particular, especially for young kids, which is one of the top reasons for kids not going to school for respiratory illnesses like asthma. And so we're really excited about this collaboration to use cutting edge technology and replacing diesel powered buses with biodiesel fuel. So we've been really excited about that. And it reduces anywhere from 70 to 80% of the toxins in the air as a result of using biodiesel as opposed to traditional diesel fuel.
And where are you sourcing your biodiesel?
So we, the biofuels industry, they get that from our renewable energy group is one of the big providers of the bio fuels that DC Water uses. And so, how they get it all there is a different issue. They get it on trucks and stuff like that. But they're using REG, Renewable Energy Group, who recently merged with Chevron. So they're growing their footprint. We'd like to see biodiesel used more in New York as well. As you know, I'm a former state senator from Buffalo. Shout out to Buffalo and the Bills. But there are not enough. There are so many there's so many diesel vehicles, especially heavy duty vehicles on the road, and they're talking anywhere from 30 to 40 years before we get them all off the road. And we need an immediate solution, because you can have an immediate impact on reducing greenhouse gases. And places like New York are really short in terms of on having facilities where biodiesel was available. Meanwhile, we have thousands, tens of thousands of diesel powered vehicles on the road in New York. And I think this would be a great way to have immediate impacts on health, immediate impacts on the environment, and greenhouse gases as well.
What is more practical in when you want to get into biodiesel fuel? Is there a practical method of converting vehicles, or does it make more sense to buy new vehicles?
So I would say to you, it's more cost effective at this point to retrofit or repower existing vehicles, provided you look at, because you can do fleet analysis, either our office or other Clean City offices in New York, like Empire Clean Cities, can work with fleets, both public and private, and do a cost analysis to see, does it make more sense to retrofit or repower that vehicle with biodiesel, or does it make sense to go buy a new one? We will find that often it's more cost effective to repower, especially if that vehicle has another 10 or 7 to 10 years of life left on that vehicle. You're probably better just repowering it, because you can do that anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000 depending on that vehicle, and there are different companies that can help with that.
And how long have you been using it?
DC government has been on this program for about 3 or 4 years now. It's been very, very successful. We've worked with them using DERE grants, Diesel Emission Reduction Act grants. You can also use CMAQ funding, and you can also look at using some of your bond funds or O&M funds from the public sector as well. But we'd like to see both public and private entities using that. Diesel vehicles are all over the place in both the public and private sector. There's been this big focus on passenger vehicles, but the fact of and making those electric and hybrid vehicles, but we've not really gotten serious as a country and as a state of New York in terms of how do we really address the medium to heavy duty vehicles, right? We've got to get really serious about that, because the emissions from one diesel powered truck is the equivalent of anywhere from 7 to 11 cars, depending on the age of that diesel powered truck. So that's why we're saying, let's try to retrofit those vehicles. If you're a fleet manager, a corporation, both or public or private, and you're not really comfortable with the pace of electrification, we'll get you. You can repower or retrofit a diesel vehicle, or you can buy a biodiesel truck. And there are a number of vendors that we work with that can help make sure that you have the fuel, and that you have the technology, and your staff has the proper training as well.
About what percentage of your fleet has been converted?
So we're a third party, we're an independent nonprofit, and we've been able to work with DC Department of Public Works and DC Water. I don't know the exact number, a percentage that DC Water is used, but I know it's been well over 100 vehicles that have been converted from diesel to biodiesel. And the DC Department of Transportation right now, we're working with them, and they have a really big fleet as well. And they're looking to convert some of their old vehicles and some of the new vehicles that they're going to purchase. They're looking to do that as well. Also, Prince George's County, Maryland, We're working with them. They just recently submitted a grant application and to get some federal funding for biodiesel vehicles as well, because people who are on the front lines working with fleets, they want to make sure that as the technology continues to evolve around electrification, they want a reliable entity a reliable fuel that can reduce greenhouse gases and emissions, and also they know that can start up and reach its destination with minimal challenges. So that's why many fleets are reaching out to us regarding using biofuels.
Can you put the cost in perspective for when you deal with these governments or even private entities? How do you get them to accept the cost?
Yeah, it's very comparable. By the challenge. So if we were thinking about getting a new electric trash truck, which I love those, but it's almost 2 to 2.5 times the cost of a regular diesel powered truck, right? So getting a biodiesel truck is almost comparable, maybe 5% more. And so they can live with that. To transition to an electric truck, it's it's anywhere from 2 to 2.5 times. So that's a big pill for folks to swallow. And if you say, hey, you know what, you have 500 trash trucks or snow plows that are diesel powered, we can help you, for $5 million, you can retrofit half of those and have an immediate impact. And city councils would love to see that, right? Because you're not saying in 20 years or 30 years we're going to see those reductions. You'll be able to see those reductions faster, because they can literally retrofit those vehicles within a year's time, that number, and you save money and you improve the climate as well, and improve the health for people in those underserved areas.
What's been easier, getting the getting the government sector to adopt, or the private sector?
Our focus so far has been on the public sector. However, right now we are increasing our education and outreach to include the private sector as well, because many private sector institutions have sustainability goals, and some of them may not be as familiar with this technology. And so we are pushing hard over the next 12 to 24 months to do a lot more education to private fleets as well.
And from the work you've been doing as a nonprofit, can you talk a little bit about the progress you've made to the eventual goal of equity?
Yeah, so that's a really, really big thing that I've spent my entire life focused on, is equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. I'm always back in these spaces for some reason, but so we've made some progress. When working with the DC, we're making sure that as they retrofit these vehicles, that they're developing a plan and strategy to make sure that cleaner vehicles are being equitably deployed in throughout the District of Columbia, which is really, really important, because if you don't plan and track things, you'll find that cleaner vehicles are concentrated in areas where air quality is the best. So that's really important that we do that. We're also doing listening sessions as well. So we've had 2 equity, energy, transportation, and environmental equity listening sessions in the District of Columbia. this year. We have another one coming up the end of October. And then we're doing one in Prince George's County, which is just outside of the District of Columbia as well. And really talking with residents about air quality, about transportation, about energy equity. And it's really given us a chance to listen and learn, bring good information, and find out just how people feel about some of these issues. And one of the things we found is that a lot of the underserved areas feel like these resources don't get to their areas enough. I was astonished by how many people knew at least one person in their immediate family or on their street that is suffering from some type of respiratory illness. And that number, over 70% of the people that have attended our meetings have said they know at least one person that is suffering from some form of respiratory illness. And of course, I would passionately suggest and argue that it probably stems from poor air quality as a result of transportation.
Historically, yes, these areas have been trafficked by so many large vehicles, diesel spewing trucks. They've driven up asthma rates in New York City historically through communities like the Bronx and out in Brooklyn as well. Any area where there's highways, correct, and heavy industry. Have you seen any impediments that, towards adoption, hurdles that seem insurmountable with either the government sector, the public sector, or the private sector?
I think the biggest challenge is two big challenges right now. One is just making sure that we educate policymakers about the technology and making sure that they understand that this is a way to improve the climate faster in a reliable way. I mean, the Department of Energy strongly supports biofuels, and the EPA does as well. And then the other big thing is just making sure that people understand that supporting biofuels does not mean that you can't do other projects around electrification, right? Electrification is there. We support it. We have projects around that. It is very costly, and we still have to deal with all the challenges that come from creating electricity and reliability on the grid. So you can do both, right? And I don't believe that America should create another sole source primary fuel that's 80% or 90% of our fuels are electric, so that we recreate what we have with the oil industry. So I believe in fuel diversity. I think America needs to have a fuel mix that's better than it is right now, because it's not very diverse in this country, and we should not go back. We should not put the same onus on our great grandchildren and great great grandchildren that was put on us, where now we're totally dependent on foreign entities for powering our planes and powering our cars and trucks and passenger and work vehicles.
Can you take that one step further and show me how, talk to me a little bit about how biodiesel fuel can work with electric?
Yeah, and there are a lot of different technologies that are out there that I'm still learning every day. But there are ways in which you can use biodiesel, and it's not only as a backup, but also as a complement to your existing fleets, right? So there's nothing wrong with having vehicles that are powered with biodiesel and then having an array of electric vehicles. And then there are some folks that are using biodiesel as a way to support efforts for electrification as well. And so there are different ways in which people are doing that too. So there's a lot of good things that are out there.
Well, this has been a fascinating follow-up to the panel. Did you would you I'm sorry, did you want to bring up anything that you that was mentioned at the panel that we haven't touched upon?
I would say two things. One is that I hope, as someone who was the first Democrat to chair the Committee on Environmental Conservation in over 40 years, when I chaired that committee in 2009 and 2010, I was the first African American to chair that committee as well, and I carried the climate action law, which has evolved and which was passed by the state legislature in the last couple of years. In that legislation, though, it does not recognize biofuels as a way to reduce greenhouse gases. And I think that needs to change. That is a policy fix that should happen. And, I'm willing to do whatever I can to encourage New York to make sure that they do two things. One, make sure that there's a renewable fuel standard and credit for New York State, and then also that biofuels is part of the mix for the climate solutions for New York State. So those are two really important things that I believe are extremely essential, that needs to get done by the next year for the State Senate Assembly and our great Governor Kathy Hochul.
So I'm going to do this starting off on a very basic level. Louis, I'm with Louis Brown, a partner at Consors and Conway.
Yes, that's correct.
And Louis, tell me a little bit about your firm and what it does and what you do.
Well, we are a law firm and a lobby firm in Sacramento, California. Represent a broad cross-section of interests. And we've represented the California Advanced Biofuels Alliance and the California, or the Clean Fuels Alliance, formerly known as National Biodiesel Board, for probably close to 15 years in California. So I've been engaged on the renewable fuel issues really from the start as California passed various regulation in this area.
Terrific. And you joined us for a panel discussion at our Clean Biofuels Conference in Albany. It was called Pathways to a Clean Future. And you sat on a panel, environmental equity, transportation, and heating fuels, how the use of biomass-based diesel is contributing to the health and wellness in the United States, and specifically in environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. First off, let me ask, please summarize your comments from when you first spoke at the panel regarding this subject.
The way to summarize it best is that we know that the long-term goal and long-term climate change policies are seeking electrification. California has already moved forward in looking to ban the sale of new gasoline cars by 2035. They're now looking to do the same in heavy duty and medium duty vehicles as well. But those are long-term goals. I mean, 2035 is a long ways out there. And frankly, that goal does nothing today to help health issues, air quality issues that we now see and can address. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is, especially with renewable diesel and biodiesel, those are drop-in replacements for petroleum diesel. They have great carbon intensity scores. They lower greenhouse gas emissions. They lower particulate matter. They help reduce the NOx issues and other air quality issues that environmental justice communities are dealing with today. So we don't want to distract from the long-term goals, but what we should be doing is trying to reduce carbon today and improve the health benefits of these communities today. And you can do that by transitioning the fuel. That doesn't require a truck driver to go out and buy a new vehicle. They just simply switch their fuel. And by switching the fuel today, you increase the health benefits. And we just think that that needs to be part of the conversation. It's helpful for the environmental justice communities. It's helpful for our carbon goals.
And what are the legal hurdles, if any, that prevent conversions or companies from the private sector or even the public sector to consider when transitioning to these cleaner fuel options?
No legal options. It's really just the will to do it. And frankly, it's just getting people to focus on it. People have been focused on, and I don't mean to demean it, but the shiny light of electrification. And they've not been able to focus on what can we do today. So it's really bringing policymakers around to say, look, you need, and we all do it. We do it in our everyday life. We need short, medium, and long-term goals. The long-term goal, everyone seems to be agreed on. Let's focus on the short-term goal of cleaning the air in the transportation sector, which is the largest emitter of air pollution. And we can do that by these renewable fuels. So it's really just getting people to focus on it. The demand, as the demand goes, the supply will be there. And we already see significant growth in the renewable diesel market and the biodiesel market. So it's really, Ralph, I think, just a matter of focus. Electrification is just a whole lot easier to focus on than talking about, renewable diesel.
What kind of pushback do you often get? What's the line that people give you a lot of times when you start talking about these alternatives?
I think the line is that, they simply think it doesn't do enough. And it's the proverbial letting the perfect get in the way of the good, and making progress. We're not going to get to the finish line on step one. And so, there are other issues that people bring up. There are concerns about feedstocks. As we start to grow this market of biodiesel and renewable diesel, what does that mean in these renewable feedstocks that we use, whether it be soybean, whether it be animal fats and tallow. The biodiesel industry in California, utilizes yellow grease, which is the grease out of the backside of a restaurant. So what does it mean there? But again, I think those are questions that the market will resolve if we start to see the demand increase as a result of policy.
Where does New York State stand in terms of embracing these clean energy alternatives that we can seize on now?
Well, from the presentations I saw, it looks like the policy and the legislation is starting to take shape to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But they also seem to be addressing, and I think, and asking the right questions, especially when it comes to electrification. Are the manufacturers going to be able to meet that? Is the grid going to be able to supply the power that's necessary? And in the meantime, what do we do about this pollution? So from what I've heard, from what I've seen in some of the legislation that's being drafted, it looks like they're moving in the right direction to adopt something that's similar to the low carbon fuel standard that's been in California for a number of years. It's not a top-down mandate. It's an incentive-based program that basically forces the industry to go out and innovate. And the fuels coming into the market that have the lowest carbon score get higher credit prices and greater opportunities to compete in this. And we've seen it be very successful in California. And I think New York seems to be heading in that direction as well.
Are policymakers hard to convince of the equity benefits?
Not once they start to see the numbers. And, as we start to show things, For example, you know, there's a study that we call it the Trinity study that was done in partnership with the American Lung Association that really highlights some of the most polluted areas in the country. And in California, it focused on the ports, specifically the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, where, you know, frankly, is the gateway to the to a lot of the commerce that's happening now. And that study showed just immediate reductions in health concerns and issues. And I think once policymakers start to see the benefits that happen from the air pollution and the health, and they combine that with the economic incentives that come from a low carbon fuel standard, it really kind of becomes a no-brainer.
We've been talking a lot about how this applies to transportation, but it also applies to heating fuels, right?
Yeah, it does. And I'll have to admit that that's an issue that I'm a little less knowledgeable on, only because we don't utilize heating oil in California like they do in the Northeast. I mean, it just really doesn't get that cold out here. So, but it is definitely another source that you have to look at. Is that especially in the Northeast, where heating oil, frankly, can be fairly dirty fuel. And if you can transition that to a renewable fuel that has better health benefits, frankly, it seems to go hand in hand with the discussion that we're having about when you're talking about transportation.
Are there any federal regulatory hurdles or concerns at all that would slow down the implementation of biomass-based diesel fuel or the same for heating fuel? Are there any federal guardrails in this?
No real hurdles. I mean, in fact, I think the federal government has looked to really build the industry. The renewable fuel standard, the credits that they provide for renewable fuels is there. I think it does come back to a more of a state level. I don't know that we'll see a federal low carbon fuel standard at any time soon. Congress moves slowly, and so they can focus on that big picture of like a renewable fuel standard. But I think it really comes down to, at least in the near future, what individual states can provide. And we've seen it. We've seen various states in the Midwest do blend mandates where certain percentages of fuel are renewable. The West Coast is now pretty much moved entirely to a low carbon fuel standard. You got California and Oregon and British Columbia that have already implemented one. Washington is not far behind. And so I think this movement is going to happen from the coasts. And once we see New York come on board, maybe once we see New York and we see the West Coast come on, we'll see a little bit more movement at the congressional level.
This has been really very interesting, very fascinating to catch up on this again. What are next steps to see some immediate action taken in encouraging the public and private sector to adopt biomass-based fuels?
Well, I think having New York and the Northeast states come on board would be amazing for it. You just start to look at the percentage of the population then would be, impacted in a positive way of having these low carbon fuels. And with that, we see the corresponding growth in production. And I think it's just all moving in the right direction at this time.
Louis, this has been really great. Is there something that you wanted to include in this discussion, or a question I didn't ask that you wanted me to?
No, I think the only thing I would, conclude with, Ralph, is how we started it. What we've seen in California is that as the low carbon fuel standard came in place, it was biomass-based diesel, it was renewable diesel that generated the credits that and really helped drive the carbon intensity scores lower. And in doing that, it's created revenues for the electric policies that we have in California. And it's really, been a success story for us as we try to accomplish our climate goals, but also then address air pollution issues.
Groundwork has been around for about 20 years. We were born, I should say, of the National Park Service at their 150th anniversary. They visited a Groundwork London and saw that youth, they had a high youth unemployment rate, and they also had a lot of urban blight. Groundwork brought these things kind of together and employed the youth to address the blight in London. Very, very successful program. The National Park Service wished to replicate that. Fast forward, they did an RFP and Groundwork was born. Today, I think there's 23 of us. Our startup funding comes from the National Park Service, and we really are trying to change places and change lives. I think the real interesting thing about Groundwork, and what I would want everyone's takeaways to be, is most of the whether they be professional or governmental organizations that focus on the environment, whether it be natural resource conservation services, you could look at our cooperative extensions, our farm bureaus, etc. For the last 75 years, they have walked out of our cities. Small problem is that's our people are walking back into our cities. It's critical at this time that nature and the environment be part of our urban areas. If nothing else, increasing our tree coverage will reduce our possibility of flooding, and we've recently had some tragic flooding. So today's Groundwork Elizabeth, we work really focus on youth development, engaging youth in environmental justice topics, whether it be clean air, clean water, reuse of adaptive reuse of brownfields, things like that. And then in the last couple of years, we've really gotten into climate change. So we have a climate safe task force that works to identify policy issues, kind of push them up the chain, and put together the stakeholders' wants and needs so that our governments, corporations, et cetera, can understand what the community would like to be. So there's a little bit of background to how I got into my current grant. So we received the grant from the EPA. It's an environmental justice small grant, port specific. Elizabeth, for those of you who don't know, it is Newark Marine, it's Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal. At one point, it was the busiest terminal in the United States. I think that moves around a little bit now. The city of Elizabeth has the airport to the north, the marine terminal to the northeast. The turnpike runs down one side, 1 and 9 runs down one side, and then right below us is the Phillips 66 Bayway Refinery area, which is, obviously of national importance. It supplies most of the fuels, et cetera, on our East Coast, or many of the fuels on our East Coast. So as a result, our community is hotter, we are wetter, we have a higher incidence of asthma. In certain areas, especially where our housing authorities are, you expect people to have a shorter life expectancy, and their economic outlooks remain poor. All of this really started, has a lot to do with earlier redlining policies, which made a nice portion of Elizabeth unavailable for purchase, and really increased our utilities. So as we have been looking around to understand what Groundwork Elizabeth can champion and engage the community in, and really educate the community in, we really have taken a deep dive into air quality. You shouldn't live on one side of town and maybe, have asthma and live on the other side and not have asthma simply because of where you live. But it's very true here that your zip code really is going to tell more about your future, unfortunately, than anything else. We were alerted to an environmental justice small grant, port specific, when we realized that it's the time. It's time for our ports, whether they be airports or ports, to understand that they are creating a tremendous burden on our community. So as we began to investigate different ways to, first measure air quality, there's not too much measurement going on, although we do have an EPA site in Elizabeth on the Turnpike. We began to, do some reading, do some research, et cetera, and, to bring it all back to biofuels, realize that if we could take even the fleet of the Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal, trying to use their proper names. If we could just reduce that fleet, we believed we would see some difference in our air qualities. As such, we made a proposal. It was accepted. I'm very thrilled that it was accepted. And right now we're in the process of increasing air monitors, installing 12 purple air monitors in Elizabeth, and leading ongoing community conversations to get us to the point. We're getting into the port primer right now. And we've had some beginning really good conversations with the port. Our ports do understand that things are going to be needing to change, and that's really what got me to this place.
It's fascinating and frustrating at the same time to believe and know that communities can be so subjected to so many of these factors that affect their quality of life simply by where they live and the industry that's near them.
Yep.
You mentioned the airport, not the airport. Newark Liberty Airport.
Yep.
There's a lot of industry there. I guess there's all the factories around, not factories, but all the industry that lies around the highways that you drive. When you drive down the Turnpike, you've got them on both sides.
Absolutely.
I think there's a cogen plant there as well.
I believe you're correct. A little bit of everything tends to end up over there.
Fuel tanks, you name it.
Absolutely.
So
heavy trucking, heavy constant trucking. Also, just as a sidebar, what we found out and Groundwork Elizabeth worked on was getting the trucks. There's a shortcut through a couple streets in Elizabeth. And we took a couple of years, but those trucks are now not allowed on those streets and do have to go around. Sidebar, but following your point.
Well, they're contributing even more to
absolutely,
to the asthma rates. To just, you said it's hotter there.
Absolutely.
Why are people still living there?
Why do people live where they do? I mean, it's an excellent question. Something I think is important to understand first is that we all live within our own fiscal realities. When you have the resources you need for, your basic food and shelter, you need those resources first before you kind of look outside. Down by the port in the city of Elizabeth was the Singer sewing machine factory. At one point, one of the largest employers in the United States. And after they closed, the area down by the port was also redlined. Just really fell into some disrepair, et cetera. And it became a rather low income area. It had been a really happening company town, I would say, before that, just kind of for lack of a better word. And, you began to see intergenerational poverty. And I say these things really just to underscore the fact that if you don't have the money to feed yourself, to provide shelter, having a car, or a laundry machine, there's these things, these quality of lives. And when you're barely making that, there's no room. There's no room to move. Where do you move to? Those who are under-resourced and living at the poverty line clearly need to be near transportation, public transportation. So, moving from a 3-bedroom at 1,800 in Elizabeth to a 3-bedroom for 1,200 in, I don't know, Sussex County somewhere, there's no work. So we find ourselves kind of in this crunch place, or these certain populations find themselves in this place where they need to stay in the area because they need the infrastructure, the area supplies, but they don't have enough resources that they can choose to perhaps move into a suburb, and I don't want to say escape, but put themselves in a different position. Also, and I've said this 100 different ways. If you don't have resources, some of the things that those with resources care about, you just don't. If you don't have food on the table, you don't. The asthma really doesn't hit you. If you have, you having asthma, well, so did everyone else in your family. It must be a family thing. So you see this lack of education in these communities about what their most pressing issues are, because the most pressing issues are basic survival for those communities. And unfortunately, whether it be air pollution or flooding, etc., it is these under-resourced communities that are hit the hardest, and they're not able to have the resources to deal with what is being placed upon them. Your person who has limited resources loses their car in a flood, didn't have the right insurance, their whole economic reality, comes crashing down. So I think it's important to understand the different socioeconomic levels when you look at the psychology of why would people stay in an area, in an area that has poor air quality, or there were water issues, etc.
And you've said that while they lack these resources, many people living in such areas really aren't aware of what they're consuming, what they're breathing,
For sure.
or even conscious of the fact that it's so hot because of all the traffic that's just been filling the area with smog. And it's who's informing them about these dangers?
Me. Organization, first it's your federal government. There's a certain responsibility that the federal government has to monitor, water, air, et cetera, et cetera. After you go down from there, it's going to be in New Jersey, obviously the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Then going down to your city, and then maybe, to a block group. The issue that comes in is, although there the lack of agreement on what we would want to teach our children about the environment. I mean, we still do have conversations of people who clearly there's no climate change and everything is, good. I always say the government is usually the worst at promoting itself. They do so many amazing things, but when it comes to actual education, just general public education of the work that is being done, the majority has no clue. I'll give you a great example. I had the absolute pleasure of working with the Department of Environmental Protection this summer on a youth inclusion initiative. For us, it was 12 kids, City of Elizabeth, from the Housing Authority. I do a lot of work with our Housing Authority. They're a fantastic partner. And we had the best summer ever. We explored the DEP. We learned about water quality and water testing, and air quality and air testing. We learned about conservation. We learned about conservation firefighters, etc. And the thing I kept on hearing, first half of it, I had absolutely no clue about. But from these kids was, I had no idea our water's tested every day in, 200 locations. I had no idea they were, testing the air, et cetera. So, I say a couple of things. One, we don't understand. Two, I feel that the people who do protect our environment, although they are reports, the report doesn't, I find the information doesn't tend to get to general public. So it ends up kind of with nonprofits and concern, like neighborhood groups, etc., to begin to understand, hey, what's going on with our air? What's going on with our water? What, we have brownfields. What does that mean? Can I be there? Can I not be there? Etc. There's a ton of information coming at people, every day at all times. But not a lot of the information on the state of our environment necessarily comes down to our children, who probably are our best educators, and to our communities who don't directly participate in these activities.
Elizabeth is a diverse community.
Very much so.
So I would imagine there's a language barrier on top of everything, correct?
Yes, definitely a language barrier. We are a city, not completely of immigrants. We have a heavy immigrant population here. I think at last count we had 69 different nationalities. And it usually takes some time for them, obviously takes time for them to acclimate. And very often information has not been done in, I mean, for us, we would probably say English and Spanish, maybe English, Spanish, and Creole. And there are some other Haitian, there's some other ethnicities that I would bring up. I will say this, in the last 5 years, the city of Elizabeth now supplies all information in both English and Spanish, as do our libraries and our schools for general, like flyers, etc. This city at least is very well aware that we have an extremely diverse community, and we really celebrate it. But that is not the case every place. This is Northeast New Jersey. We are the most liberal place on the planet. So we tend to be forward thinking.
A person such as yourself, I don't every day would think is thinking by clean alternative fuels, biodiesel based fuels. When did these alternatives come across your radar screen, and do you see them as really a strong step forward in trying to address this issue?
So a dear friend of mine moved to California, to Humboldt County 17 years ago. And about 10 years ago, she told me about this glorious diesel Mercedes that she bought, and she was switching it to veggie oil. That was, I'm sure actually plenty of people have very similar stories. That was my first introduction to biofuels. I think that our energy future has to be diverse. I don't think that any fuel energy source at this time comes with absolutely no issues. Everything has some kind of issues that go with it. And I think it's super important for us to diversify how we choose our energy future. In listening to and doing my own research and trying to better understand how things work, I did some exploration in biofuels, and after some conversation, what I realized is there is we are moving away from traditional gas as we know it, and it seems like quite a rush to jump to electric. And I think that it seems like quite an easier, it sounds like an easy answer. And I don't really think it is. I think that there's some really great opportunities for biofuels. And one thing that kind of does stick out to me is, as our gas changes, we'll be losing quite a bit of, how do you say, if we're not putting ethanol in our gas, there's going to be quite a bit of resources that will need to be directed into other things as time goes by. There's also waste everywhere that can be turned into some type of biofuel. We will need to become better recyclers and better users of resources. There's no choice. And I think that biofuels can be a great answer for where we are, right now. And then with everything, I guess we see how we go as we come along.
I've shared the same thinking. I like electric. I think it's awesome that we're suddenly pivoting towards everything electric. but something has to generate the help generate that electricity.
Absolutely.
We don't have enough hydro power, hydro power generators and windmills to produce the electricity, and biodiesel does provide one option, right?
Yep.
For transportation and for heating, which is what your panel was focused on.
Mhm.
So hopefully addressing some of the issues locally in Elizabeth, getting people to switch over to biodiesel-based heating, and providing the electricity locally with maybe or converting more vehicles to biodiesel-based fuel. That's one way to start. However, Elizabeth has the unfortunate circumstance of having a highway that travels right through it, right? 2 of them. So all those vehicles have to be converted, right? The only complaint I heard from first adopters of recycled restaurant oil was that it stinks.
I will say my girlfriend lasted about 2.5 years, and I do think that there was some smell issues. I'm not exactly recalling, but I've heard similar things.
But right now sounds like a small price to pay for having a Mercedes. So
I thought it was a pretty cool looking car myself.
It's been fascinating revisiting this with you.
Oh, thank
I
you.
hear what you're saying. I can't imagine it can't happen fast enough for you, right?
I invite anyone who thinks that we can wait for a clean energy future to come meet some of my friends at the housing authority who are dealing with asthma. And I think when you see a 3-year-old who can barely breathe, I think it really underscores the urgency to clean up our fuel situation. And biofuels are there. So where they can fit in, I firmly believe they're a part of our energy future, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see some progress in our work with the Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal, the port, and the Port Authority as well. Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful. I pretty sure in the end we all want the same thing. We want clean air, clean water, and safety, to enjoy our lives and our families, and the good opportunities that are available to us. So crossing fingers.